It is taking some extra time, it seems. To the Scale Up Valley podcast, where we bring the best tech leaders in the world to share with you the best scaling up lessons about how to scale a SaaS company from 1 million to 100 million ARR in revenues. I have the pleasure of having a very special guest today. If I'm not wrong, free-time founder, already a serial entrepreneur, which is Anthony Rose, the founder and CEO at SeedLegals. Anthony, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
So yeah, let's get to know more about yourself and how did you end starting with being the man behind or the mind behind BBC iPlayer, and then you went to found another three companies, and now with SeedLegals. So let us know a little bit how you arrived to SeedLegals and why did you start SeedLegals?
Sure. So my journey starts many, many years ago with, I used to have my own company doing electronics hardware. I guess in the days before they were called startups, they were just called companies. And I learned that as a founder, before really the days of startup investment, you had to get to cash flow positive and make money. Otherwise, you didn't have a business. And then the company, I got into 3D graphics. That morphed into joining Kazaa, the music file sharing company. I was living in Australia at the time. One day I got a call from the BBC saying, we're looking for someone with media product experience to head up BBC iPlayer. I said, the BBC, where are the stock options? But I was persuaded, so I flew over to London, headed up iPlayer. After I was kind of done there, it was time to get back to startup life, and I built a startup, sold it, built a startup, sold it, got tired of paying lawyers' fees, invested in a few small startups myself, and that met my business partner, Laurent Laffy, quite a well-known ex-VC and serial angel investor. And he was saying that from the investor perspective, he was tired of paying lawyers, the mistakes that humans make on complicated cap tables, and the time that everything takes for people to argue by Word document with red line track changes. Technology has to change this. So we got together, we met about 3 years ago now, spent about 6 months developing a product, launched. We're now about 35 people. We're based in Holborn in London. We think about 1 in 12 early stage UK investments are now done on SeedLegals, growing very nicely month on month. We've closed our own Series A round with Index Ventures leading on SeedLegals, of course. And I guess one of the really interesting things is that, TransferWise promises borderless banking. Imagine boardless legals. Imagine you can see your deal terms across different countries in the same interface, in the same synergized way, but make an investment in a different country, or as the founder in a country, be able to get investors in different areas more easily investing in you. So that's going to be for another podcast later, but that's in our future. So yes, that's a bit about SeedLegals and a bit about SeedLegals. So if you're today a UK startup, this is the fastest way, most efficient way to do your next funding round, get investment ready, do your SEIS and EIS and so on. So instead of paying lots of money to a law firm, head over to SeedLegals. It's a 24/7 platform that comes with our help. And what I love is how technology changes things in both the expected and the unexpected way. So when we started SeedLegals, we thought people were after legals. What I recognized very quickly, nobody cares about the legals, or not very much. What they want is a solution to their problem. So what we were able to do is take things that people were looking to do, productize them, use data over hundreds of rounds to work out what people really want to do, and then package those up to be much more efficient. And then we could use that to get to the next step. So what I particularly love is that people used to do funding rounds every 12 to 18 months. Thanks to technology, we've transformed that into what we call continuous funding. And we've seen more investments now closed at 1 a.m. than at 10 a.m. So founders have many things to do in their day, but instead of waiting on a call to talk to a lawyer, on a Sunday night, you can buy some instant investments and close the round at 1 a.m. It's fantastic. And so the goal is to be the operating system of your company to do a range of things that, lawyers and so on used to do before. Although for me, it's not about disrupting lawyers. It's about just building a great set of solutions to the problems our customers have.
That's an amazing vision, and already also an amazing track record. So 1 in each 12 investments in the UK being made with SeedLegals. It's really impressive, and I like also the recurring side of it, in the way that you can go through multiple rounds using the SeedLegals platform. So usually in the show, we go through what we call the 10 Rockefeller habits, which are very simple habits that one of the most successful businessmen in the history of the United States has applied to his own business to create an empire. They are super, super simple, and that's why it's also very easy to not go through them and to not apply them. So, and starting with the number one, which I really believe it's critical to scale, which is the executive team is healthy and aligned. And how looks like your founding team? And I think you already described that you have someone who also knows a lot about the core business. And maybe something more relevant to you, how do you plan to build your leadership team 1.0? So I imagine that's at this stage, you are getting to the stage where you need to go from the founding team to the first version of your leadership team.
Fabulous points. And I think two key parts for me. The first one is I talk to many, many startups really on a daily basis. And it seems to me there are 3 roles that you need. It doesn't mean 3 people, but 3 distinct roles. Role number 1 is the domain expert. So maybe that's the doctor interested in dialysis, or it's a delivery guy who's trying to make deliveries more efficient or something. So somebody knows the audience and is often, the person passionate about the product. The second role is the Mr. or Mrs. Money, the person who's going to make sure the business is funded, make sure the business is profitable. And that's probably more like a COO role. And the third role is the person who's going to build and ship it. Usually aligns more with the CTO type of role. And so I think in order to have a successful business, you need the 3 roles satisfied. And then the question is, if you look within yourself as a founder, which one or more of these are you? And I think it's quite rare that you're all 3 of them. But what's interesting is if you can analyze yourself and recognize the ones that you are not, then you want to surround yourself with people who complement your skills. So for example, I'm a tech product guy. It turns out that in this space, by being a bit of a serial entrepreneur, I'm somewhat familiar with funding rounds. My business partner, he's really more of the domain expert. So in our relationship, he's the domain guy, I'm more of the product shipping guy. And between us together, we both more or less cover the funding piece, although I probably defer a bit more to him. So what I quite like, secondly, is the yin and yang. So between us, we are probably 90% aligned on things, and about 10% of the time we look at it from different angles. And there, that yin and yang, I think, is fascinating in helping you decide what to do next. Because if you only talk to yourself, it's an echo chamber. So, for example, when you have a growing business, there are endless of numbers of things you should do. Should we launch in America? Should we have products in adjacent areas? Should we have SeedLegals for property businesses? Should we change our pricing? So what do you decide? And I think what's interesting is when you can have a business partner to brainstorm these things. And to me, one of the key differences between a founder and an employee is the founder, the weight of the world is on their shoulders. They need to make the business a success. I don't have kids, but I would imagine if you had kids, you can't after a year or two go, I'm bored with the kids, can I give them back? It's not an option. You've gotten people away from their previous jobs. They were working so you can to deliver. And so in a world where nobody can tell you what the answer is, should we launch in the US? Well, it could either be a huge opportunity or we'll go bust by wasting millions of dollars on a Silicon Valley, office.
Absolutely.
There's no one you can call and see what to do. So it's nice to have people with, opposite views, and you can brainstorm what it is. Which you can only do as the founders, of course. If you have an inclusive team, you can share with the team, but the team always are paid a salary. They have an option to disappear and go off and join Google if they don't like the outcome. So I think the part one of the question is between my business partner and myself. I very much like the obviously greatly sufficiently aligned so you can execute the vision, but actually see differently on a range of things that doesn't put you in your own echo chamber. The second thing is the executive team.
Correct.
And having thought about the roles that you fill, I think it's important to know when you aren't filling one and how to have someone else fill that. And I think the first time the founders have somebody that they hire who takes over an area of their responsibility, it feels a bit like you slicing off some part of your body.
Correct.
I could, is this part one of firing myself or having someone else? Maybe I'll wake up one day and I'll have nothing to do in the business anymore. So, it's said that when you reach 20 or 30 people, you now need to put other management in place. And for myself, I love spending time with the team. It's the most important thing. But as there are more and more team members and more incomings, you find yourself spread a little thinner. And so actually recently we hired a CCO and a CMO and in fact now I've been able to hand over quite a lot to somebody else, and it's at once it feels like maybe I need to be doing this myself, but on the other hand it was just crazy. You just can't sustain doing that. So I don't profess to know the answer, but I've learned a little bit about being less emotional about realizing when it is time to hand the baton to somebody else.
That's a very good point. And nowadays, I like to do the analogy between the fundraising and assuring that you already know the investors that will be your partners in your next funding round, and the same about the seats on your leadership team or the members of your leadership team that will join in 12 months' time, so that you start speaking with them, sharing what is the vision, understanding if they might be a fit, and understanding if they have the skill set that you were describing very well to join the company. So which means that the job of the leadership team is an ongoing job as fundraising is for a high growth company. Do you agree with this perspective?
I think that some broadly, yes, but I think the nuance, the difficulty is that when you start the company, there is no one else. So you're doing everything yourself. And as the company grows, essentially you're doing less and less. And as you do, you're handing over areas of responsibility, and you're moving from being hands-on on product to managing people. And some people love that. For me, I must say my joy comes from turning an idea into reality. I love the building of things. The people side of things is really less me. And so now, as the business grows, and I've been at the BBC with a team of 250 people, the question is, do you find people to take over that bit? Do you learn to love that and be better at it yourself? It has to be some mixture of the two. But actually, one of my investors in a previous startup told me, and I think it was a really good point. He says, actually, I know less about the business than almost everyone in my team, But what I know is how to run a brilliant team, how to find great people, and how to nurture them. So in fact, I don't need to know anything about the business. I
Right.
only need to know about my team. I must say, if you look at Moses going up the mountain, he's at the top of the mountain. I'm still at the bottom of the mountain. And I'm not sure I quite want to be at that point because I do like the hands-on piece, but it'll be interesting for me as a journey as well to work out what I would like to do going forwards.
That's awesome. You already introduced it, the habit number two, which is everyone is aligned with the number one thing that needs to be accomplished at this quarter to move the company forward. And I really think that that's what you were just discussing. Should we open a new geo? Should we open a new vertical? Should we launch a new product? So there are a lot of strategic decisions that might be very tempting to make in order to expand the business. And I think it's super counterintuitive, especially when you are really on growth mode, that in principle to grow, you need to open up the number of verticals, the number of geos, and the number of products in order to be able to scale. And what happens usually is that we slow down the growth of the company. And of course, with the pressure of increasing the headcount, which complicates everything, the decision-making process, the communication flows, etc., etc. So how difficult it was for you, and maybe starting with SeedLegals, if you want to give another example of your past experiences, to really stay focused in a specific vertical, in this case, in a specific industry, which is legal. And you were just describing also the geo. So what are the key strategic decisions that you needed to take until now at SeedLegals, and what are the ones that you are considering that you need to make next?
I wish I knew the answer on prioritization. I think you probably approach it really from two ends. On the one end are the big picture strategic things, the ones that will either be major revenue opportunities or have major risks associated with it. On the other end are the things that the team are doing on a day by day, hour by hour basis based on customer feedback, product improvements. And so for me, I like to find somehow blending the two. I love to have a customer focused business. My goal is that if someone hits us up on our web chat and says, I don't understand this, or how do I do that, or we add a product enhancement, I'd like it to be less than 24 hours from having a request to shipping that, if it's a small thing to do. And that's how the product, so if our team, for example, tell me, hey, customers have an issue doing this particular thing, they keep asking us how to do it, I'd see what's the minimum number of hours, not weeks or days, to make a small improvement in the product to make the friction from that go away. So part of the business is all about rapid, small improvements, but rapid and small doesn't get you out of the local valley that you're in. It makes perfection in a small space, which is perhaps good, but really the difficult one is now when you want to leave your valley and go to another valley. And that's often particularly difficult because the founders are usually domain experts in a particular space. So for example, with Laura and me, we think we know startups pretty well. What about later stage businesses? What about accounting or property? We don't know these areas. Clearly there's a tech piece that might work there, but we're not the subject matter experts. So that carries a lot more risk. So I think one more data point, which is I heard a wonderful saying, which is one of the key attributes of a good founder is procrastination. And that means just because you want to do something, actually sometimes putting it off is a good idea. And I think that worked brilliantly for us with ICOs. So about 18 months ago, we started getting a lot of incomings from companies wanting to use SeedLegals to do their ICOs. And I was temporarily quite excited. Should I divert resources and do ICOs? I mean, it could be huge. Anyone involved with ICOs at massive valuations. We were going to look to raise, if we had the word ICO and blockchain in somewhere in our title, maybe it would add a zero to valuation. And so the problem I had was that I didn't know really anything about ICOs. I didn't know the regulatory areas, and I couldn't find anyone who was an expert. So I kind of put it as a background thread. And, in the event, zero people asking us about ICOs these days. We had then a bubble of people asking about STOs, security token offerings, and that's disappeared. So I think that what I love as a mental, intellectual activity is you have a new thing you'd like to do. You think about maybe number one, what would happen if I saw my competitor doing that tomorrow? Would I kick myself that I'd missed a wonderful opportunity? Or would I actually think that when I looked at their website and saw all the work that they had done and just didn't care, that actually that was the best way? So, it said don't build it until you've prototyped it. Actually, you can go further, which is almost don't bother building it till a competitor has built it. You can check it out and see. And if nobody cares, and so what I quite delight is when I've thought about doing something, probably procrastinated, or it just didn't reach the top of the pile, seen someone else build it, and then look at it and go, nah, I'm just not going to use it. I'm so pleased I never spend my time and money building that. And I saw that back in my iPlayer days when other video companies introduced all sorts of cool, whizzy things that I was at once wanting to do and were on my roadmap. And then I looked at their portal, and actually I never bothered playing with it other than, trying it as a, what's my competitor doing? And then was quite pleased I never put the money and time into building it. So the short answer to your question is, I totally don't know the answer. And I think my team frequently tell me that I try to do too many things, or we try to do too many things. But number one, I try to at least stay laser focused on what's the big mission. Two, I tell my team, if we stray from the mission, please remind me of it. Do not do something just because I told you. Three, think if my competitor did it, would I care? And if I didn't care, then maybe it shouldn't be at the top of my priority list. I hope that's helpful.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Anthony. It's a really great point. And if we looked, for instance, for the case of Zoom IPO this year, it is clear that sometimes in order to really build a great company and a great vision, you don't need to innovate in the sense that you need to create something completely new. You just need to be the one who better execute it and who better serves the customer needs. And I love your laser focus on be super close to what the customer is really asking and serving the customer.
So, by the way, if I can hop in, I think, Zoom versus Skype is a very good point. And so Skype is an excellent example of a company that's lost sight, in my mind, of course, I know nothing about how they work internally, so I'm just surmising, has lost connection between what people really want and what their team are obsessed that they want the product to become. So if you look at Zoom, it's got stuff that you actually want. You can send a link. You don't need to have people added in contacts. You can record the full screen stuff, and the sharing works in a way. What has Skype done? They've added idiotic stuff like emoji and notifications. You can like things. They're trying to make Skype into a Snapchat. And so somewhere at Skype headquarters, there's some millennial product designers who are not at all thinking about what their users really want. They're thinking about what they want their product to be. It needs to be cool and zippy, and they've added all this shit that nobody wants. And all it's happening is making people move to other products instead of figuring out. But this is the classic problem, which is, they're in a particular valley and people are using it in that way. And now they think there's a particular size audience or there's a particular size threat. Should they optimize for that audience, or should they go and almost in a sense tell the audience we don't care about you. We're putting emoji and liking of comments and stuff that you add someone on Skype and it sends a little wave. So there I am connecting with the VC fund, adding the person, and it's like a little emoji waving. It's completely wrong for the audience, and I like to use that as a great example, I think, of a product team that has lost its mission and is led by ego or design or something, rather than by analyzing what users are really wanting. And of course, I'm just saying that from the outside. I mean, maybe they know for complicated reasons they need to morph it into something else, but I think about that as an example of what not to do.
Absolutely. So, and coming to the habit number 3, if you have the right team in place for each stage of growth, if you are really focused on what you need to do next in order to have your BAC or big area audacious goal closer, it's time now to assure that this flow of communication from the customer to the team to the investors, from the providers to the team, etc., runs as quickly as possible and as effectively as possible. So that's why we are so obsessed about creating those meeting rhythms that, again, needs to be different from stage to stage of the company. So what are the meeting rhythms that you have in place at this stage at SeedLegals?
Well, maybe I can approach the question a little bit differently, which is about a customer-driven team, I think. So I think for me, the key learning was when I was at the BBC with BBC iPlayer. And it was in the days before books on Agile and MVPs and things like that. And, I kind of made it up as I went along. And but when I arrived to take over iPlayer, I identified all these things that, for me, the product just wasn't doing it. There were like 100 things. And I went to talk to the team and they justified each one. Anthony, you're on Windows, or it's only you, or nobody likes this program, or only you would look for this detail, or it's just your computer was a frequent one. And I told them, you might be right. Each one might only affect 1% of people, but there are 100 of them. I mean, statistically, most people, it's not going to work. And I realized very quickly that trying to persuade a team from your own view was going to be tough. Much better to have them sit with users. And they really weren't engaging with end users at all. And this is a key problem when I talk to many founders. They sit in their WeWork or their office or whatever, and you dream about a vision and you don't interact with real users. So I'm super obsessed with that. Everyone in the business interacts with real users. So at SeedLegals, we use Intercom, which is fantastic. For web chat, our median response time is 1 minute 48 seconds when people message us. And really everyone in the company has visibility of chats. You can tag our CTO if somebody says, I don't understand how this works. We'll just, our customer support team will tag myself, tag the CTO, and then my goal is to respond with a product improvement as soon as possible. We have a Slack channel where we post customer incomings. So the goal is not only to have a GitHub or somewhere where you file tickets, but no, it's to bring people in the office essentially in front of the audience. And that in the past meant you have to go out, out of the building. That's tough. But when you've got web chat and people are interacting with you on a second, there's 40 chats in progress at any time, then people have immediate visibility. And I love that the team is driven by customer piece. And that means that the executive team is really now focused on the big vision, and customers are often driving the minutiae, and the team are now have a mindset of doing not just what they're told to do or what they feel like doing, but analyzing what people are telling them and evolving the product to do that.
Love it. I think it's one of the meeting rhythms that really should be in place, and that we never talked about it in the show after those 80 episodes, which is kind of a customer advisory groups, or having the ritual or the rhythm of speaking with customers in a regularly rhythm, let's say. Very, very good point, Anthony. And so we are coming to the end of the show, but before we go for the last question of the show, let's cover something that is critical for any company which is scaling, and that SeedLegals is also providing here an end, which is cash. So what were the some of the mistakes or what advice do you give to founders in order to manage better their cash flow?
It's a great question. I think one of the problems that the startup industry essentially has is that it's obsessed with the amount that companies raise and the valuations. So when you read TechCrunch or other publications, all they write about is companies raising money. They won't publish your story unless it's a fundraise. But actually raising money is the failure to grow your company without having to raise money, in a sense, which is ironic for me to say, given that we're in the business of empowering companies raising funding. But if your metric, if a definition of success is raising more, that's basically saying I'd like to give away more % of the company that I own. And also, once you raise a lot of money, you start ramping up the amount you spend. I've done that in the past, and I'm probably doing it even less consciously now. So, to me, startups are, I like to think of it as ripples in a pond. So the founders have an idea. Nobody invests just on a PowerPoint. So you have to put some effort into building a prototype. And our data over hundreds of rounds shows that founders put a median of 26,000 pounds of their own money into the business. So that's like the pebble drops in the pond. Ripple one is the founders put some money in. Then the companies may raise, in the UK, £150,000, giving SEIS tax breaks to angel investors. That's your angel round. Then you may raise £500,000 as a seed round, and then you might raise 1.5 million or so as a Series A. So the formula seems to me, based on hundreds of rounds we see on SeedLegals, you want to raise enough money to raise your valuation by 3 to 5x, so you can raise 3 to 5x amount, giving away about 15% equity each time, such that by the third ripple, the third fundraise, the founders still own more than 50% equity. And after the third fundraise, either you don't need to raise money because the business is now scalable on its own, or you're happy to exit the business and everyone makes a great return. So if you think about that formula, what is your funding round goal is to let you increase your valuation by hitting certain milestones, be it on traction, revenue, or whatever, to get a 3 to 5x multiple on valuation, which enables you to raise 3 to 5x as much to get you to the next step until eventually you get to whatever destination that you wanted. And so if you're giving away much more than 15% equity, now, of course, it would be nice to raise huge amounts much sooner. But if you can try to get to that formula, I think that's the formula for success. I think one more thing which is interesting, which is, and I think this is generally problematic also for the industry, is success for founders and for VCs is often quite different. So VCs, there's a power law. 1 in 10 of their investments might return a 50x multiple. So for a VC, they might make 10 investments and they might know that 3 will die completely, 4 of them will get a 1x return, and 1 of them will get a 50x return. The problem is, for a founder, you don't want to get home and tell your wife, honey, I'm playing a numbers game. There's a 90% chance the business is going to fail, and there's a 1% chance that it'll be a unicorn. He or she is going to want to say, actually, what I would like is, with a higher degree of certainty, we can pay our mortgage in a year's time, and we'll have a high chance of a moderate outcome. You know, you're paying yourself no or minimal salary. So we'd like to get something modestly good with a good degree of certainty. And so here are the dichotomy between the one VC playing a numbers game, they're playing poker with many, many rounds, versus you as a founder are putting 3 or 5 years of your life into something, and you want to maximize the chances of at least a modest success. I mean, some people are crazy and want to change the world in a good way, and others are very much more modest. But somewhere in between, I think, is the right blend between ambition and reality. So that is the problem, that often VCs, because they're playing the numbers game, want to dial up to 11, the risk-reward ratio,
Right.
whereas founders want a much lower risk-reward ratio. And VCs may start by putting a lot of money in, start leading founders to scale prematurely, to take many more risks than they otherwise would have. And that's often egged on by industry publications that show, oh, company X raised 20 million or raised 300 million. What are they going to do with 300 million? I have totally no idea. So yes, I hope that answers that question.
Absolutely, that's a very good point, and also to remind ourselves about the incentives of both sides of the table. So we are coming to one of my favorite questions of the show. It's my favorite question of the show. If you would have the opportunity to meet yourself at the beginning of SeedLegals, what advice would you give yourself?
I think I'd like to say I'm old and wise enough that I don't think that much has changed between the beginning of SeedLegals and now. I think if I went a few startups back, there would be a lot more learnings.
Sounds good. Let's do it.
So I think probably try not to raise much more than you really need. I think a few startups ago, I raised lots of money. I was very successful in raising lots of money. The problem is that you then very quickly spend lots of money before you've got product market fit. And that's a classic problem of founders who are, I mean, usually it's very difficult to raise money, but if you're in the exceptional position of being able to raise lots of money, you tend to want to do it. I mean, people often say if you can raise it, if you're able to raise it, do it. But I think often focusing on being lean is a much better discipline, and it helps you focus on get to cash flow break even or profitability sooner. So that's thing number one. I think thing number two, I used to be probably a terrible micromanager. And for me personally, it's been a journey over many years to try and devolve power to my team and not wander in. And I think this is a particular problem when you've got a founder who's a sort of technical person, because you used to do all of this technically yourself. And initially you can solve technical problems at least as efficiently as anyone in your team. And then you need to learn to not solve the problem yourself, but coach the team to be able to do that themselves. So I think the team leadership skills, which are in no way I think a strong point for me, but something that I'm consciously working on. Thing number three is do one thing and do it really well. And so I think, and I've seen personally from previous startups that the problem is customers are often looking for just one thing. I want an app that does X. But investors are often looking for a vision of all sorts of things. So for your investors, your slide deck says how you're going to be a B2C proposition, and then you're going to be a B2B with APIs, and then you're going to have data, and then you're going to put it on a blockchain or whatever it might be. So you having all these things that, in theory, more is better. And actually now when I see slide decks and I see people doing 4 things or 3 things, or even just a B2C and a B2B, I know that this is a negative, and I try to be super focused to not fall into that trap. So for example, no end of people call us and say, I'd love to have a white label version of SeedLegals. We'd like to use this in our law firm, or can we have APIs, or can we have data? And once upon a time, I used to agonize over decisions like this because they're all incremental. And now it's really super easy for me. I go, we're a B2C platform. I mean, my customers are companies themselves, but essentially it's as if they're a B2C platform. I don't do white label. I don't license. I mean, maybe one day that will change, but I just do that. And so, maybe sort of like Alcoholics Anonymous, just say no to the next drink. It's just say no to the next API, white label, whatever it is, strategic partner incoming. So I think that's thing number 3. And maybe the last one, thing number 4, is nothing really particular from my background, but I think from what I see with many companies is I think they overvalue the advice that they expect to get from their investors. So I've seen and been involved in a few tweets and other Slack channel threads and so on, which is, I'm looking for an investor and an advisor, or, I'm going to pick a fund based on them with their vision and things. And for me, it's pretty simple. An investor is somebody who likes you and the company's vision. You like them because you need to work together in the future. You can agree on a valuation and you can agree on mutually agreeable deal terms. And it's fantastic that they help you on, HR and hiring and send customers your way and so on. But I like to think, maybe because my wife's a lawyer, I like to think of things strictly as transactional and contractual. So you give me money, you entrust me to build the business. My goal is to give you a return on investment and give you quarterly updates. And of course, I would love to refer deal flow to you, and I would love that you send people my way as customers, but it's strictly contractual. So my advice to founders is keep the roles of investor and advisor separately. Why? Because advisors might give you rubbish advice. You might want to fire them later. You can't fire your investor. By putting the two roles as one, you can lead to an awkward situation where they're giving you advice that in fact perhaps matches their goals of playing the big numbers game and doesn't match yours, but you can't untangle it. Or maybe they're obsessed with you being a SaaS platform, but actually your business is just fine as a recurring one-off platform or whatever it might be. So I think also people overvalue the advice that they're going to get. I'm going to give my advisor, I need an advisor on the board because it's just going to make me much more investable. I'm going to give them 5% equity. It's like, whoa, you can hire 5 people and give them % equity, and they're going to be with you in 3 years' time building your platform 24/7, as opposed to one person who's going to breeze in one day a week or one day a month and tell you stuff to do and then disappear again. So yeah, my advice is avoid outsourcing, avoid advisors, and instead surround yourself with a team who buy into the mission, who are there 24/7 with you on the mission, because the mission's going to evolve from what you originally had in mind. And the best people to help evolve it are the ones in living and breathing the dream, rather than the ones who pitch in for quarterly board meetings.
Amazing way of closing the show. It was such a pleasure, Anthony. Thank you so much for joining us today again.
Thank you so much. It was a great set of questions, and I hugely enjoyed it. I hope it's helpful to the audience as well. So, and by the way, if you want to reach out, it's anthony@seedlegals.com. You're welcome to drop me any thoughts, whether you liked my thoughts or you want to disagree, with pleasure.
That's awesome. And as you were saying, thank you also to our community for joining our episodes. Feel free also to do the same with me, as Anthony was saying, and let us know if you'd like to have a specific guest or a specific topic that we didn't cover yet about this scaling up journey from 1 million to 100 million US dollars. We will keep bringing the best tech leaders in the world so you can scale as quicker as possible in the most healthiest way. See you soon and keep scaling.